Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Editorial. We are constantly asked by a lot of you viewers as to what happens to Indian economy after COVID. What happens to jobs? What happens to industries? What happens to investment? What happens to food? Inflation. Is food going to cost more? I have a very eminent guest today. A very eminent guest who will answer all these questions for us. He is Dr. Arun Kumar. He is the author of a book called The Indian Economy's Greatest Crisis: Impact of Coronavirus and Road Ahead. Phenomenal economist. He's an authority on developmental economics. He's an authority on public finance. He's an authority on public policy and macroeconomics. Let's go to him and ask him all these questions. Let's get right into the show. Sir, it is indeed an honor for me to talk to you, sir. It's indeed an honor for me to talk to you. Sir, we'll get directly into the questions. Sir, what is the fate of our economy after COVID? Where do you see our economy going?
So, this virus that we have now, the SARS-CoV-2, is a very virulent virus. This is the seventh virus in the last 20 years. We had, SARS, MERS, Nipah, Zika, and so on, But none were as virulent as this, and that's why we needed to have lockdown. Because to prevent the disease from spreading, you just have to prevent people from meeting each other. Now, when you do a lockdown, you have factories, you have offices, etc., but people are not going there. So work comes to a halt. Therefore, production comes to a halt, and therefore incomes decline. And when the incomes decline, then consumption declines, and when consumption declines, then businesses find their capacity utilization goes down, and their investment goes down. So the two drivers of the economy, consumption and investment, are both hit. And in that sense, this is worse than a war. Because in a war, you don't have unemployment. Everybody is working, everybody is fighting the war, etc. But here you have massive unemployment. So, in last year in April, according to CMIE, 122 million people lost employment. But my argument is that about 200 million people lost work. Because if your factory was closed, you still were on the rolls. So you'd say you're employed, but you're not working. You were a teacher, you were not going to school, so you're employed but not working. You were a government servant who was receiving the salary but not going to work. So therefore, work dropped by 200 million. So that's almost half the workforce actually came out, and therefore the economy declined very sharply. The government, of course, says that the economy has declined by 7% last year, but my argument is it declined by about 29% because in the government's data, unorganized sector is not counted separately. It is assumed that the unorganized sector is doing exactly like the organized sector, but the unorganized sector is 94% of the workforce and 45% of the output. So if that has declined dramatically, then you can see the economy would decline. Now the government also, just to illustrate, doesn't count the unorganized sector, especially in the quarterly data which it releases. Take for instance agriculture. It said that the agriculture output grew by 3%. But my argument is that actually agriculture output declined. And the reason is very simple, because the government's document says that the data wasn't coming, so they assumed that the production targets were fulfilled. But we know that the production targets were not fulfilled. Fruits and vegetables could not come out of the fields to the market. So in Azadpur Mandi, in my book, I have given the data that less than half the fruits and vegetables were coming and the rest was rotting in the fields. Then similarly, demand for milk came down because bulk consumption of milk by hotels, restaurants, that declined. Weddings were not there. Street shops had closed down. So therefore, the demand for milk declined dramatically. Then chicken were culled because people are afraid that chicken was spreading the disease. And then demand for eggs came down because the midday meal schemes stopped, and midday meal scheme used 1 crore eggs. So if you look at it, poultry, milk production, fruits, vegetables, flowers, which is 50% of agriculture production, came down by at least 50%. So where the government was saying 3% growth in agriculture, actually it declined. Similarly, other components of the unorganized sector, which the government assumes is growing at the rate of the organized sector, actually was declining. Demand was shifting from the unorganized sector to the organized sector after demonetization itself, and now it was dramatically down. So the economy would have declined by not 7%, but as per my calculation, by about 29%, which is a huge decline. And the
Absolutely.
reason India was the worst affected of the top 20 countries in the world is because no other economy has 94% of the unorganized sector. There, the unorganized sector may be 4%, 5%, 10%, but in India it's 94%, and they get very little income. So therefore, 80% people said that they don't have enough money to even buy 1 week's supplies. And that's why as soon as work stopped, their income stopped, and therefore they started starving and they started migrating. So nowhere in the world, no other economy did you see millions and millions of people migrating from urban areas to rural areas in pathetic conditions. So that is what is an indicator of the huge impact of this pandemic on the Indian economy last year. Now this year again, because the second wave was not anticipated, the second wave hit us because we did not go in for lockdown in March. We only started thinking about lockdown in April. April 14th was when Maharashtra went in, April 18th when Delhi went in. But most of the parts of the country went in the first week of May when the numbers of infections had reached 4 lakh, which was a record high in the world. And therefore, by then it was too late and the wave became very high and large number of people died and large number of people got affected. Therefore, consumer sentiment has come down. Now, if
Correct.
you look at the data from the RBI, in January 2021 itself, the consumer sentiment had come down from 105 to 55. In January 2020, the consumer sentiment was at 105. It had come down to 55.5 by January 2021. That means the economy had not recovered. Similarly, capacity utilization, which was in January 2020 was at 70%, had come down to 63%. That means there was a 10% decline even in the organized sector. So the government's data saying in the Q4 of last year, the economy grew at 1.4% is not correct, even for the organized sector, much less for the unorganized sector. Now, as a result of the second wave, the consumer sentiment has fallen further because every middle class home, every poor person's home, there's illness, there's people death and so on and so forth. So the consumer sentiment has gone down. Similarly, capacity utilization has gone down below 63 now to around 50. So in this situation, the economy is not going to recover quickly because people are not going to suddenly start spending, and people are afraid of a third wave. Now, the fear of the third wave is so much that a lot of middle class people will save money because they spent a lot of money in illness, etc., in the month of April, May, and they think that if the third wave comes, they need money. So that suddenly the consumer spending is not going to go up, and therefore investment will not go up, and the government is not doing what it should be doing. The government should pump in purchasing power into the hands of the people who've lost employment, who've lost work, who've lost income, but that's not happening. Even yesterday's package, very little fresh announcement for giving relief to the people who've lost employment is there. And as a result, I don't see the economy reviving. So in Q1 of this year, the economy was supposed to come roaring back, but because of the wave, what has happened is that I think the economy barely grew at 7-8% because of the low base effect. Now in
Correct.
Q2, because of the fear of the second wave, again the economy will be down, so there'll be negative growth. And then in Q3, depending on what vaccination we are able to do, whether the economy is able to unlock, whether the third wave comes. So there's a lot of uncertainty about Q3 and Q4. But my own suspicion is that even in Q3, the rate of growth will be negative. So instead of the government's expected 10% rate of growth for the year, I think the economy will probably have zero growth or even could be negative. That means there's a likely decline of at least 10% in the growth rate that was projected last year.
Sir, this 20 lakh crores that was announced in 2020, has the relief actually come in? Is it been infused into the economy?
So you're absolutely right. The Atmanirbhar Bharat package, which was announced in May last year, was 22 lakh crore, including the 9 lakh crore of liquidity released by
Yes.
the RBI.
Yes.
Now, the problem is that you see only 3.5 lakh crore was from the budget going into the hands of the poor people, right? The increase in the rural employment guarantee scheme, the extra food that was given, the free gas that was given, etc. But that amounted to barely 1.5-2% of the GDP. Now, in contrast, in the advanced country like USA, the amount of money given, to the poor people was phenomenal. $2 trillion was given by Trump in April, May, then $900 billion before he left office, and then Biden came and gave another $1.9 trillion. So the fiscal deficit rose by some like 15%. It went up to 20-25%, in the US, similarly in Japan, other places. In India, we did not allow the fiscal deficit to rise because we were worried that if the fiscal deficit rises, then there could be other consequences. But actually, there would have been no consequences. So what happened was that enough purchasing power was not pumped into the economy. It not into the hands of the people who had lost incomes and so on. And that's why demand did not pick up so much. And that's why I said in January 2021, after the first wave had petered out to a considerable extent, even then the consumer sentiment was down, capacity utilization was down, so the economy had not yet recovered. Now, the reason is very simple. When the economy is not working, credit is not the right way to go. So you can give credit, but credit is needed for production, credit is needed for investment. But if production is down and investment is down, then people are not going to invest more, people are not going to consume more. And that's why this 22 lakh crore, of which at least 18, 19 lakh crore was all related to credit, that did not work. So last year, in fact, RBI was complaining that the banks are parking 8 lakh crore of extra surplus funds with the RBI at reverse repo. And the RBI is saying, but we have cut your interest rates so that you can lend it out to businesses. Businesses should expand. And the banks are saying, if businesses are not coming forward because their production is down, then we can't lend it to them. And that's why we are depositing at the reverse repo rate. Similarly, now banks are depositing 4 lakh crore with the RBI at reverse repo rate because the banks are also flush with funds and because the production is down and investment is down. Therefore, the demand for credit is down. So demand for credit has slowed down. So this Atmanirbhar Bharat package was based on what is called supply side economics.
Correct.
Supply side economics means we give incentive to producers to produce, to invest. But that works only if there's demand. If demand is short, then investment will not take place. So it's like saying that if my house is burning, then somebody comes and says, okay, now we will set up a fire station near your house and we buy more fire tenders. But that'll take several years. By then my house will be burned. So today the situation is we need to pump in purchasing power, create demand, then the credit, etc. will work. So the package that was announced yesterday also, again, it's based largely on credit of the 6.9 lakh crores that is being promised. That's largely based on credit. But if the economy doesn't have enough demand, then why would the producers produce? Government is the only one that can pump in purchasing power, that can start spending more on the capital expenditures. But again, government's capital expenditure is not going up to the extent that it can compensate for the decline in capital expenditure of the private sector, the decline in the consumption expenditure. So you can see from the budget presented on February 1 that as compared to the revised estimate of last year, there was hardly any increase. And then the capital expenditure which they're showing is increasing, but out of that you should net out the disinvestment, because disinvestment means your capital is becoming less, and therefore the capital expenditure increase is hardly there in the budget. So therefore the government is not pumping enough demand into the economy to revive it, and private sector cannot do it on its own because that will mean losses for them. So therefore the government's plan is not quite right to tackle the crisis.
Sir, all top economists, including you, including Dr. Jayati Ghosh, including all top economists, has been talking about infusing money into creating demand. And
Correct.
we have been focusing on improving our supply, which is absolutely, I mean, as a layman, even I can understand that that's not correct. Sir, why do you think the government is focusing on increasing supply rather than increasing demand?
So you see, these are based on what are called neoliberal policies, where the idea is that you should support businesses. That the incentive system for businesses, if it is right, then businesses will start working and they'll start creating employment and so on. But that will work only if there's demand. But the conservative economists are all the time talking about balancing the budget, etc., and not having the role of government expand. So if you create a fiscal deficit, it means the role of the government expands, and the entire driving force of the economy becomes the government. Now, after 1991, these policies have been given up. What were the earlier policies where the government and the public sector was the driving factor? Now it has to be the private sector. So you're all the time giving concession to the private sector. Like, with farm bills, you're giving, a concession to the corporate sector to corporatize farming. On labor code also, in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, you gave concession to the businesses so that the labor code could change and they could make more profit, at the expense of labor. So the entire focus of government is pro-business. So it is in this framework, which has been there since 1991, that has got accelerated. So the kind of programs that this government wanted from 2014 and which they could not implement earlier because there was opposition, like on the farm bills, on the labor code, etc., they included in the Atmanirbhar Bharat package. So the idea is that during the pandemic, there's not much of an opposition, so you can push these policies. So you can see that some corporates are doing very well. Like for instance, there's one corporate house which has got a huge amount of money into the infrastructure sector, whether it be ports or airports, etc. Similarly, there's another big corporate house which has captured the telecom sector, as compared to the earlier existing companies. So the government is now creating these huge monopolies in the economy. So it's a very pro-business stance of the government, and this pro-business stance is what it is going for. It's not looking at the what's happening to the common man, what's happening to the middle classes who are falling, because their incomes have fallen. They've fallen below the poverty line also. So according to one report, 230 million people have fallen below the poverty line since the
Yes.
pandemic started. So you already had 220 million people who are below the poverty line. And let me say the poverty line of India is extreme poverty. It's not just poverty. So if you're earning 5 rupees more than the poverty line, it doesn't mean you become rich. And now, because you see the incomes have come down, these people have fallen below the poverty line. And I'll quote you the socio-economic survey of Delhi. Now, Delhi is one of the richest part of the country. So Goa, Delhi, Chandigarh, these have the highest per capita income. But the socio-economic survey of Delhi showed in 2018 that 90% of the families in Delhi are spending less than 25,000 rupees per month, and 98% are spending less than 50,000 rupees per month. So in other words, even the 90% who are spending less than 25,000 rupees per month, they're not very well off. They're lower middle class and poor people. So the vast majority of India is lower middle class and poor people, and they are the ones who are worst affected by this pandemic, and their situation is deteriorated, and the government is not looking at that. Government is not seeing how to generate jobs. So like for instance, in the rural employment guarantee scheme, where it increased the allocation from 60,000 crores to 1.1 lakh crore, but you needed much more, because large number of people migrated to rural areas. They were in need of work. So RBI report shows that people got only 50 days of work, and large number of people didn't get work. So you needed to expand the rural employment guarantee scheme not to 1.1 lakh crore, but according to my estimate to 3 lakh crores. Then you could have given people 100 days of work, and not only 100 days, but maybe raised it to 200 days of work. Because 100 days of work to one family member in the year means only average of 20 days of work per family member, which is very little. So you needed to increase that, and also give work to whoever came forward. Similarly, you needed to start, urban employment guarantee scheme like the rural employment guarantee scheme, because large number of young people in the urban areas did not have work earlier and now have lost further work. The chance of getting work has gone down. So since the time of demonetization, I've been suggesting that an urban employment guarantee scheme is needed, and the government needed to do that, because at the moment you have a lot of requirement of medical personnel and so on and so forth. You could employ people and put them to work in various infrastructure projects, education, health, and so on. But the government has not done that. As I said, from the budget it only gave about 3 lakh crore, whereas it needed to give at least 8-9 lakh crores out of the budget. So that money could have gone to the poor people and the demand would have increased. So government's budget, the philosophy around the budget is very weak.
Sir, isn't it ironical? I mean, this government came into power calling UPA a crony capitalist government, and somehow we see that most of the policies that are currently formulated are pro-business, like you rightly said. Isn't that ironical, sir?
No, you see, our politicians always promise one thing and do the other. Like this government also said that rural employment guarantee scheme is a disaster, and it was thought that maybe they'll stop it. But rural employment guarantee scheme is the one that has come in for whatever support the economy has got. At least some people have got money, etc. So in other words, you see, this government's philosophy, what it said when it came to power and what it did, it promised to bring all the black money back. It promised to give a lot of money to everybody, and it couldn't do it, and then it had to go in for demonetization, which is a disaster. So this government has actually done various things which have damaged the economy, like for instance demonetization, like for instance the GST, because GST is something the unorganized sector cannot cope with, and that's why the unorganized sector unambiguously declining. And now in the pandemic, it imposed a lockdown in 4 hours time, whereas you needed to prepare for a proper lockdown. So in my book, I have discussed what are the things that should have been done before the lockdown was announced. You needed to disperse people. How can people living in slums in Delhi, 5 people to a room of 10 feet by 10 feet, how can they stay inside 24/7? They don't have toilets, so they have to go out for that. They don't have food, they don't have the capacity, so they will go out for work. So you needed to prepare the ground. And that's why it was a disaster that in June we started unlocking when the number of cases were rising. And the
Correct.
number of cases kept rising till September. And that's why the mutations take place. When the numbers are high, then mutations take place and new viruses come. So that's why the Delta variant started coming in October, which we didn't detect till February. And then
Correct.
from February it took over. So our government does not take care of the unorganized sector at all. In fact, not only in the data it's not taken care of, in terms of policy it's not taken care of. So,
Correct.
for instance, one of the policy changes was to change the definition of MSME. You know, MSME consists of micro, small, and medium enterprises. But this is a misnomer because micro units are 60 million, small and medium are 6 lakh, and average micro unit employs only 1.7%. So there's no comparison between micro and small and medium. So all the credit that's available for MSME goes to the small and medium and not to the micro.
Micro.
But micro is the one which employs 97.5% of the workforce of the MSME. So if micro units are closing down, then unemployment will increase. Now the government has no separate policy for the micro sector, and I have been arguing since the time of demonetization that MSME should be separated between micro and small and medium. But all policies that the government follows is for the large sector and then for the small and medium. So in a sense, what you're saying about crony capitalism, that is something that's underlying this government also, and it was there earlier also, which is what they were criticizing. But then they do exactly what the previous governments are doing in terms of promoting crony capitalism.
The Prime Minister spoke about 5 trillion economy by 2025. So now let's forget COVID for the time being. Let's forget 2020, 2019-20 for the time being. If you see, our GDP has been falling from 2017, possibly right after the demonetization. It has been steadily falling. In fact, the graph is slanting. Sir, would we ever become a 5 trillion economy even if there was no COVID in 19, 20 and 21?
Yeah. So actually, it's not that the GDP was declining; the GDP's rate of growth was declining.
Correct.
So for 8 quarters before the pandemic, it had declined from 8% to 3.1% quarter after quarter. So the economy was in trouble because demand had shifted. So as I've been writing in my demonetization and GST books also, that the demand shifted from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. And I've quoted Mr. Jagannathan, the chairman of the pressure cooker industry, because the pressure cooker industry has 30 units. 25 in the unorganized sector and 5 in the organized sector. And he said that the 5 in the organized sector are growing at 24% because demand is shifted from the unorganized to the organized sector because unorganized sector cannot cope with the GST. That's why I've been suggesting that GST was not correct for the Indian economy. Now, given all this, the slowing of the economy, the Indian economy would not have reached $5 trillion by 24-25, the 5-year thing. Yes, it might reach by 30 or 35, At some point it would, because after all, population is growing.
Correct.
There's some positive growth. So at some point, but certainly not by 24-25, So the problem is that you see the government is given to a lot of, sloganeering. It announces big slogans like doubling farmers' incomes, So these kind of things have been announced, but the roadmap to achieve that is not there. And to achieve that, what you needed to do was to bring in demand in the economy, to reduce the inequalities. And inequalities have gravely increased. The top 1% control 50% of the wealth of the nation. And that's on the white economy. If you include the black economy, then they'll probably control 70% of the wealth of the nation. So that inequality is increased because this government is very pro-business. So it's been doing everything to improve business sentiment, So for instance, it cut corporate tax rates in the 2019. Now, the cut in the corporate tax rate was done with the hope that, the foreign capital will come in, that Indian capital will invest more. But what did Indian capital do? It simply paid off its past loans rather than do fresh investment. So the point is that you see, if you go with the supply side economics and you keep on increasing disparities, the demand will be short. And when demand is short, then the economy will not grow at the rate at which you expect. So to achieve in 5 years a doubling of the economy, you're required to grow at some 14-15%, which has never been achieved. So therefore, this was a kind of a pipe dream. This was kind of a like a big target that was announced, to make it look good. But I don't think it was achievable even if the pandemic had not taken place.
Correct.
And now, of course, last 2 years we have declined rather than grown. So therefore, we will not be able to achieve it unless we rechange our policies.
Sir, you were the first person to write about the black economy. You wrote a book called The Black Economy in India way back in 1999. Sir, I want to ask you a very layman's question, sir. Sir, is black economy always bad?
Okay. So, it's not that I'm the only one to have researched this area, but yes, my book became quite popular. There were many other economists also, but nobody studied it probably as deeply as I have been following in the last 40 years. I started writing on it in 1980. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that you see the black economy is an additionality to the white economy. So my estimate for 2012-13 is that it became 62% of GDP. That means on 100 GDP of white, there's an additional 62, so it becomes 162. So in other words, production is more, employment is more as a result of black economy. But why do I say it has a negative connotation? It has a negative connotation because the black economy lowers the potential rate of growth. So compared to the potential of the economy, you are growing at much less. So I've shown that Indian economy has been losing 5% rate of growth since the mid 70s. That means if you add 5% to the Indian economy's rate of growth from the mid 70s, today Indian economy would be 8 times larger. So instead of being a $2.5 trillion, it would be a $20 trillion economy, roughly the size of the US economy.
Correct.
Now, why is that happening? Why does the economy lose rate of growth? Because of the black economy. And for that, I have given characterization of the black economy that it is like digging holes and filling holes. So what is digging holes and filling holes? During the day, you set one person to dig a hole. At night, you set another person to fill the hole. So next morning, you have two incomes but zero output. So I call this activity without productivity. So to give an example, you make a road, you don't put enough tar, you don't put enough aggregate, the rains come, it gets washed away. So you're repairing the same road rather than building new roads. That means the investment you made in the road is not giving you the output it should give. And therefore, the investment productivity, when it goes down, the rate of growth of the economy comes down. So therefore, what I have been showing is that compared to the potential of the economy, we are growing at 5% less. So in the 70s, when the economy is growing at 3.5%, if the black economy had not become more than 10%, then we could have grown at 8.5%. In the last 15 years, where we have grown at an average about 7%, we could have grown at 12.5%. So that means India is missing out roughly about $17.5 trillion of output currently. That is because of the black economy, and that's why the black economy, even though it gives some employment, it gives some output, but compared to the potential, it lowers the potential because people are not being productive. Whether it be, say, take a teacher may not teach well in the class so that he can do tuition. Now look at the waste of time of the child because the child doesn't understand in the class, and then and the tuition also, the child is simply made to mug up, still doesn't get the understanding. You take a doctor who recommends tests that are not needed. So it's all wasteful expenditure, which is not leading to productivity of the economy. Similarly, you can take, in businesses, they're doing under invoicing and over invoicing, and through that, they're taking capital out of the country. So, my estimate is that between 1948 and 2012, India lost $2 trillion worth of capital. That's the opportunity cost of capital that went out. Now, if that $2 trillion had been invested in the Indian economy rather than going out, then of course the Indian economy would be far bigger and far more productive. So there are a large number of features of the black economy which are leading to loss of productivity and loss of production and loss of employment. So that's why I argue that even though it provides production, it provides employment, but in the compared to the potential of the economy, it has lowered the actual situation.
Sir, doesn't informal economy be part of the black economy, sir?
No, this is again, you see, there are many misperceptions about the black economy. Like this is one of them, that informal sector is a part of the black economy. You see, in the informal sector, as I was discussing earlier, the incomes are very low and they're below the taxable limit. Our taxation really begins at about 500% of the per capita income. So most of the people who are in the informal sector earn income way below the taxable limit. So whether they declare their income or they don't declare their income, they're not evading any tax, and therefore it's not black. Now, this is not to say that some rich dhabawala or some panwala, etc., they may not be earning enough income and they may be not hiding their income and therefore they may be generating black. But their numbers are very small compared to 94% of the population which is in the informal sector. So bulk of the black incomes are generated in the formal sector through under invoicing and over invoicing. As I gave the example, if you have a doctor who sees 50 patients but declares that he's only seen 20 patients, then the income of the 30 patients becomes black. Or, he recommends tests that are not needed and therefore, he gets a cut from the labs. These kind of things are proliferating in the Indian economy and they're all relating to the organized sector. They're not the unorganized sector. Similarly, there's a misperception that all the black money is abroad. Now, if all the black money is abroad, then why do demonetization? Because you're not demonetizing the dollar, you're not demonetizing the Swiss franc, you're demonetizing the rupee. But if the black money is abroad, then how does demonetization affect that? So my estimate is that only 10% of the black income generated every year goes abroad, and 90% remains here. And of the 10% that goes abroad, about 40% is round trip back into India via Mauritius and Cayman Island and Singapore and so on, because our businessmen take the money out, don't pay tax, then through Mauritius route they bring it back and they don't have to pay tax, and they invest it in the stock market and so on. That's why the stock markets are booming, because the black money that is already outside, that is being brought back by the Indian businesses to shore up their business. Similarly, there are many other misperceptions about the black economy. So I've pointed to two, but there are in my book on the black economy, I've mentioned several misperceptions about the black economy.
Correct. So that means, sir, this demonetization was a disaster, isn't it? I mean, it was absolutely a disastrous decision taken to tackle the black economy.
So you're absolutely right. The demonetization decision, and I have written about it. I've been teaching this in my class since '84, and I wrote a paper in EPW also pointing out why demonetization would not work. So we need to understand that demonetization was done on another misperception, which is that black means cash. So it was thought that black is all cash, and therefore, if we squeeze out cash, the black economy would go. But this is a mixing up, because what does a person do? A person works and earns an income. Out of that income, you do the consumption. The balance is your saving, and to earn a return, you invest it. And when you invest it, it becomes part of the wealth. So you have income, consumption, saving, investment, and wealth. Okay, so wealth is what your black money could be, But of that, cash is a very tiny part because you have to earn a return. So you've invested your black wealth in all kinds of assets. So the black wealth, my estimate is cash would be less than 1%. Okay. So
Okay.
if you squeezed out even that 1%, you would have affected only 1% of the black wealth. But 99.3% of the of the money came back, the cash
Correct.
that was in circulation. So you didn't even squeeze out that 1%, And the reason is very simple, because black income generation continues. Black income generation should be separated from black money. Black money is only a tiny part, okay, of the black wealth. And it is through the black income generation process that you generate black income every year and it becomes part of your wealth. So black income generation through under invoicing, over invoicing does not stop because you've done demonetization. So somebody who buys, say, cotton worth 1 crore and says that I have bought cotton worth 1.5 crore, that means I have over invoiced my cost, Or like in Satyam's case, where there were 43,000 workers, you declared that you are having 52,000 workers. So there were 9,000 fictitious workers whose income you were taking out. These mechanisms continue. So black income generation continues, okay, and black money also could not be taken out of the system because people have ways of converting their cash into legitimate wealth, okay, through banking, through hawala, through various other mechanisms, So therefore, demonetization was premised on the wrong premise that black means cash. That is not true. We have to distinguish it in black income generation and the black wealth. And of the black wealth, less than 1% is black money. And even that we could not tap. And therefore, the demonetization was a disaster. It actually impacted the unorganized sector. Because you see, what is cash? Cash is like blood in the body. It circulates the oxygen in the body, the blood. Similarly, the cash is required to circulate income. I pay the shopkeeper pays his worker, the worker goes out and buys something. So money keeps circulating. We don't eat money, right? So therefore, when you had the shortage of cash, work immediately stopped. And that's why you saw markets were empty, the wholesale trade stopped, the factories stopped and so on. And therefore the economy suffered, and especially the unorganized sector. So the demonetization did not affect the black money or the black income generation, but it impacted the economy adversely, especially the unorganized sector.
My last question is, sir, what are the recommendations that you would give the government to revive our economy?
Okay, so as I said, in the pandemic, because of the lockdown, we have factories, we have offices, etc. But people are not able to go to work. So incomes have come down, and therefore demand has come down. So first thing the government has to do is to revive demand in the economy by pumping in purchasing power into the hands of people who have lost employment, who've lost work, so that they can begin their consumption. Once that happens, then you can begin to start, ramping up private sector investment, etc. Because they will not start investing more unless demand comes back up. So this is the first thing the government has to do. Second thing is we have to rethink our development paradigm because it is because of the development paradigm that we have that the unorganized sector is so large, and the unorganized sector doesn't have the incomes to be able to take care of any crisis. So whether it be a drought, whether it be a flood, whether it be the pandemic, it is the unorganized sector that suffers. So we have to rethink our development paradigm and give a living wage to every individual. At the moment, the unorganized sector doesn't get a living wage. Its children are not able to study, get proper education. they're not able to get proper health facility, they don't even get proper drinking water, much less water to wash their hands for dealing with the pandemic. So we have to rethink our labor policies, and the wages have to go up. A living wage has to be assured to every individual. Third thing is we have to realize that we are a collectivity. This disease has gone right up to the Antarctica. No nation is safe. There's no boundaries for this disease, and there's no big guy or small guy. The president of the USA got it, the prime minister of UK got it, India's home minister got it. So nobody is safe until this disease disappears. So we have to see that everybody is treated the same. We are a collectivity. That means the role of public sector is very important, whether it be in the area of health, whether it be in the area of education, because large number of children of the poor people, they're not able to get education and they'll fall behind, and disparities will increase. Now, if disparities increase, the demand will be short. So we have to lower the disparities. Next, the government has to worry about the trade. Because what's going to happen globally is there's a deglobalization that's going to take place. And this deglobalization is because people want to shorten. Every country wants to shorten its supply chain. They don't want to depend on China so much. So therefore, foreign capital is also not likely to come in large quantity, and we have to boost our own investment. So to boost investment, government's public sector investment is very important, and in the various areas of infrastructure, health, education, etc., it has to boost this. So these are some of the things that the government needs to rethink, especially the development paradigm, and taking care of the poor people, taking care of the trade and so on. Yes, and also environment. Environment has become very critical. The reason environment has become very critical is because of the environmental destruction. The animals have come closer to human beings, and when animals come closer to human beings, the viruses mutate and jump to human beings. That is how these viruses are jumping. So in nature, you have 5 lakh viruses, of which 5,000 affect the human beings. And as the viruses mutate in animals, they come to human beings and then they start proliferating. So therefore, we have to worry about the environment so that we continue to protect our environment, which means consumption has to decrease. Consumption cannot go on at the present rate. And finally, what is coming is a new normal. This new normal that we are headed towards, there'll be a lot of automation. Already you can see e-commerce is galloping at the expense of the local stores. Now, when automation takes place, then the number of new jobs will be very few compared to the old jobs that will be displaced. So there's likely to be massive unemployment and fall in wages. Now, whereas we need to raise wages. So I'm against the UBI, the Universal Basic Income, because I want productive work to be generated, because work gives dignity. If you give simply money without work, then it doesn't give dignity to the worker. So therefore, I'm against UBI, but I would like that the government should invest in creating large number of jobs in rural and urban areas. So this employment policy and the technology policy, they have to be looked at. In other words, the entire development paradigm with which we have done our development in the last 70 years, that needs to be revisited, not only in India but also globally. But let's do that in India.
Correct. Sir, thank you so much. What an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
In my book, I've discussed most of these things. My book on the pandemic and its economic impact, which came out from Penguin in December last year. Correct. So all this I have discussed in my book. Whatever I've said today is already there in my book.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
All the best.
So, as far as corruption is concerned, I'd like you to wait when this government goes out of office. Then many of its misdeeds will come to the fore. When Rahul Gandhi said, "Hum do, hamare do," and the way these two corporate houses have been making progress despite the economy slowing down, what does it represent? It represents government's bounty, government's unashamed favor to them. That's why they are prospering, even in a difficult situation.
Is the prime ministerial candidate going to be an issue that you are going to discuss?
No, don't. That is a trap. Don't fall into that trap.